Are you passionate about justice? Do you believe that every voice deserves to be heard? Then let me introduce you to Angels Voices Silenced No More, an organization dedicated to empowering victims, families, and advocating for justice. At Angels Voices Silenced No More, we believe that together we can make a difference. Through our comprehensive support services, we provide essential resources, referrals, and assistance to those affected by crime. But we can't do it alone. We need your support to continue our mission of amplifying the voices of victims and their families in New Mexico. By donating to Angels Voices Silence No More, you are directly helping families fighting for justice. Visit angelsvoicesnm.org to learn more about our initiatives and to make a donation that will help us provide crucial support to those in need. Your generosity will make an immediate impact on the lives of victims' families. Join us in creating a New Mexico where justice prevails. Together, we can empower victims and ensure that no voice is silenced. Visit angelsvoicesnm.org today to donate and learn more.
Hey, true advocates. It's me, Laine from Suffer the Little Children podcast. Eric asked me to come on the show today while he's on hiatus to tell you about the unthinkably tragic case of 10-year-old Ame Deal. I'm Laine, and this is True Consequences. Shirley and David Deal were married in 1996. They had 2 children together before, near the end of 1999, Shirley, who reportedly had some unspecified disabilities, discovered she was pregnant again. At the time, Shirley said she was dating another man, so she never actually knew if David was truly the father of this baby. Shirley's daughter, Ame Lynn Deal, was born on July 24, 2000, in Monongahela, Pennsylvania. Amy's birth certificate listed David Deal as her father. Around 2004, Shirley and her 3 children moved in with David's family in Midland, Texas. The family included David's mother, Judith Deal, and his sister, Cynthia Stoltzman, as well as Cynthia's teenage daughters, Amanda and Samantha. During her time in Midland, Shirley claimed the family abused her, but not her children. She said she was like a slave to the Deal family, forced to do everything around the house, and they also hit her, called her names, and deprived her of sleep. After 2 years of this, Shirley said, she was kicked out of the home, fleeing without her children, and moving in with a man in Iola, Kansas. In 2010, the Deal family relocated from Texas to Phoenix, Arizona. This was nothing new to them. From 1988 through 2010, the family moved 28 times to various places across New Mexico, Texas, Pennsylvania, Utah, Wisconsin, and Arizona. In Phoenix, the family lived in squalor in a small, decrepit home near 35th Avenue and Broadway Road, which, according to some residents of the area, is an extremely poor neighborhood where people basically kept to themselves and avoided calling the police about anything shady going on in the neighborhood in case they themselves might get caught doing something that would get them in trouble. By July of 2011, the Deal-Stoltzman residence overflowed with adults and children, all of whom were allegedly homeschooled. There were so many people living on the property that they had to set up rudimentary tents in the backyard to accommodate all of them. Some of the adults on the property included Amy's grandmother, 62-year-old Judith Deal, Amy's aunt, 44-year-old Cynthia Charlie Stoltzman, Cynthia's daughter, 23-year-old Samantha Lucille Rebecca Sammy Allen, Samantha's husband, 23-year-old John Michael Bud Allen, Amy's father, David Martin Deal, David's daughter, 20-year-old Cassandra Cassie Deal, Cassandra's boyfriend, Travis Naylor, and a woman named Debbie Smith. At its maximum, the property was reportedly home to 24 people at once. At the time of Amy's death, according to defense attorney Rob Reinhart, who would later represent one of Amy's accused murderers, there were 11 members of the extended family regularly living either in the house or in tents in the backyard, although 5 or 6 others came and went, one of whom was Amy's father, David. His sister, Cynthia Stoltzman, was actually Amy's legal guardian. Even so, her daughter, Samantha, who had never made it past 4th grade, was essentially in charge of caring for Amy, her 13-year-old brother, and her 12-year-old sister. Samantha and her husband, John, both of whom were 23, also had 4 biological children of their own. The family's life in their Phoenix home was essentially pandemonium. Children roamed with next to no supervision, walking up and down the street wearing nothing but diapers. The house itself reeked of urine. It was full of garbage and filth both inside and out. It was infested with cockroaches and littered with used feminine hygiene products and tissues. On the morning of July 12, 2011, Phoenix police received a call reporting an injured child. The first person to respond was Officer Albert Solis, who recognized the house because he had responded to the same address a week or so earlier on reports of a large group of kids throwing rocks. The officer sprinted to the front door, which opened as he reached it, and he saw a large black dog charging him. A woman immediately yelled for him not to shoot the dog. Officer Solis later realized how strange it was that the woman was more concerned about the dog's safety than that of the injured child in question. Entering the house, the officer found 10-year-old Ame Deal on a blue towel next to a wet patch of urine, curled up with her knees to her chest and hands formed into claws. Immediately, he recognized Amy from the rock-throwing call, and he could tell right away that she was dead. Her lips were as blue as the towel beneath her, and her skin was beginning to discolor. Her body was already stiffening. Next to Amy's body was a plastic footlocker, which was a virtually airtight plastic container measuring 31 inches by 14 inches by 12 inches. The plastic bin had previously been used to store Amy's older sister's Barbie collection before it outgrew the container. Officer Solis said Amy's body was positioned as if she had been inside the footlocker, trying to push the lid off from the inside. At first, Amy's family claimed she had accidentally locked herself into the box while playing hide-and-seek after the adults were asleep. Her aunt Cynthia told KNXV-TV on July 13th,
"She was an awesome hider, let me tell you. You know, there's places that she would squeeze into that I wouldn't think my dog could squeeze into. I spent last night crying most of the night. I don't break down well in front of other people, but when I'm by myself, I can lose it real easy."
Even the children in the home recited the same story, as if they had been coached to lie about the incident. Immediately, investigators doubted this story, suspecting foul play and child abuse. They noted that Amy's body was filthy, her clothing soiled, and there were marks on her right knee resulting from being jammed against the inside of the container lid all night. Also, the container had latches that held the lid on. There was no way to latch these from the inside, and with any pressure from within, the lid would have easily popped off without the latches engaged. Finally, statements from other residents of the Deal home about the abuse they had witnessed gave police a pretty clear picture of what was going on in that house. When Officer Solis took Judith's statement, he was disturbed by the lack of emotion Amy's grandmother showed. As he walked a few doors down to take Amy's 12-year-old sister's statement, he passed Cynthia, who told him Amy was dead as she continued walking past him. The officer knew Cynthia hadn't even been at the house when paramedics declared Amy's death, leading him to wonder how Cynthia could have known that already. Officer Solis described the 12-year-old as hesitant to talk, stiff as a board, and not looking him in the eye, as she echoed the same story the rest of the family was telling, except she said she had gone to bed at 9 p.m. He had a strong feeling she knew what happened. Officer Solis took an initial statement from John Allen as the young man sat on a swing, behaving like nothing had happened. John told the officer that after he and his wife, Amy's cousin Samantha, went to bed at 1 a.m., some of the kids, including Amy, his 3-year-old daughter, and Amy's 12-year-old sister, continued playing hide-and-seek, and Amy locked herself into the box. He suggested his 3-year-old daughter, who he said loved to lock things as a prank, must have padlocked the box. While John was being questioned, his story changed multiple times. It was clear to investigators that he was covering for his wife. During breaks and questioning at the police station, investigators left John and Samantha alone in an interview room, which the couple apparently didn't know was being recorded. While discussing how their hide-and-seek story had fallen apart, John said to Samantha that they should have come up with a solid story as a family so no one would have to take the fall. Gradually, under further questioning, John began admitting to bits and pieces of the story. He finally told police he had clamped Ame into the box and jostled her around. He admitted he had used the box several times prior to that night, and that each time, when Ame was released, she was sweaty but conscious. Years later, at John's trial, Deputy Maricopa County Attorney Jeanette Gallagher would tell the jury that statement indicated John knew putting Ame into the box was dangerous because there was not enough air to sustain life. The only way air could get into the box was through holes the size of a pencil tip located under the handles. Finally, John admitted to locking Ame into the container on the night of her death while Samantha stood by and did nothing. He told investigators that Ame was first forced to do backbends and maintain the position for 2 to 3 torturously long hours as a form of punishment. When she fell, he physically put her back into the position. After he grew bored of that punishment, John forced Ame to do jumping jacks. Around 1 a.m., John told Ame to go outside and get the footlocker. Already overheated and sweating profusely, Ame was then forcibly crammed into the box. Samantha expressed concern that Ame might escape, so John latched the box shut and secured it with a padlock he had taken off the backyard fence. Detectives asked John about the padlock, which was missing. Eventually, he admitted to hiding it. John and Samantha left Ame in the box in the garage, where the temperature was above 95 degrees Fahrenheit for the entire night. John took the key with him when he and Samantha went to bed, leaving Ame confined in the tiny box to die. He said they had planned to go back and check on her in an hour, but they didn't because he just didn't get up. If you're wondering what awful infraction Ame could have committed to earn such a severe punishment, brace yourselves. Several of the other children had been given popsicles on that sweltering July day when temperatures were well above 100 degrees Fahrenheit, and 10-year-old Ame, who wasn't given a popsicle, dared to take one from the freezer without permission. One of the family members later told police, quote, "Ame lies. Ame steals. Ame needs to be punished." The next morning, when the family opened the box at around 8 a.m. to release Ame, they discovered she had suffocated to death, soaked in her own sweat and urine. They waited about a half hour before someone finally called 911. John's admission led to the arrest of several family members on July 27, 2011. Judith Cora Deal and Cynthia J. Stoltzman were charged with kidnapping and multiple counts of child abuse. Samantha and John Ellen were charged with first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit child abuse, and multiple counts of child abuse. All 4 were held in Maricopa County Jail. Bond was set at $1 million each for Samantha and John, and $500,000 for Judith and Cynthia. The other children in the home were placed into protective custody. The family's black lab, Bella, was confiscated from the crime scene by the Arizona Humane Society, where she was later adopted by a staff member. On July 29, 2011, then 38-year-old Shirley Ann Deal found out about her 10-year-old daughter's death when a friend on Facebook brought it to her attention. She then read the details online at the Arizona Republic's website. She said she couldn't stop crying after she found out that Ame had died at the hands of the same people Shirley had escaped years before. She told a reporter that she wanted Ame's killers treated the same way her daughter was, and that she hoped they would all receive life sentences. Maricopa County Attorney Bill Montgomery, who prosecuted the case, initially announced the indictment of the 4 adults on August 10, 2011, saying his office would spare no effort in seeking justice for Ame. An autopsy conducted by the Maricopa County Medical Examiner's Office determined that Ame's death was a homicide caused by asphyxiation, compounded by heat exhaustion and dehydration. Ame, who was less than a month away from her 11th birthday at the time of her death, was underweight at only 59 pounds. The average weight for an 11-year-old girl is just under 80 pounds. Court records said that Ame was chronically hungry from being denied food. If she took food from the refrigerator, she would be punished and abused. Stealing food was the reason she most frequently got in trouble. Another reason was supposedly lying. Reportedly, Ame's abuse began when she was only 4 years old, almost as soon as she became part of the household. According to court documents, not only was Ame the only one abused of the 12 children in the home, but the other children would do things intentionally to get her into trouble, which is unfortunately not uncommon. In situations involving scapegoating or targeted child abuse, other members of the family, including children, tend to pick up the pattern and join in the abuse of the targeted child. They most often do this to align themselves with the abusers and avoid abuse themselves. Ame was tormented by virtually everyone who lived in that house. She was likely chosen as the family's scapegoat because David did not believe she was his biological child, so she was considered an outsider. The family heaped blame and shame on this poor little girl, hitting her, torturing her, depriving her of adequate nutrition, and then punishing her for stealing food. Phoenix neighbors of the Deal family said Ame was often physically and verbally abused by the family, who they considered unusual. They frequently heard adults yelling expletives at the children, and they often saw children, from toddlers to teenagers, playing outside as late as 2 a.m. One neighbor told a reporter that she knew immediately that Ame's death was not an accident.
We knew right away it wasn't. Why? It was on. Because the way they used to punish the little girl, make her walk up and down the street barefooted and stuff. Oh yeah, they used to do a lot of stuff to her.
Keep in mind, this punishment took place while temperatures in Phoenix reached 114 degrees Fahrenheit. Asphalt can get from 40 to 60 degrees hotter than the surrounding air temperature. Unbelievably, none of the neighbors reported any of their observations to authorities prior to Ame's death. Several said they considered calling police, but they didn't because they didn't want to break up the family. If ever there was a family that needed breaking up, it was this one. I'll pause here for a quick sponsor break. Police revealed that Ame had been placed into the footlocker at least 5 times over the 30 days leading up to her death. In addition, other methods of abuse employed by the family, according to police, included beating Ame with a board they called the butt buster, lashing her with a belt, and forcibly dumping hot sauce into her mouth. She was sometimes chained like a dog or restrained inside a dog crate. Once, when Ame was picking up dog feces in the yard, she missed some. Her aunt, Cynthia, punished her for this by rubbing the dog feces on the little girl's face and forcing it into her mouth. Other members of the household described to investigators the abuse they witnessed toward Ame, who was forced to sleep in a shower stall with no pillow or blanket as punishment for occasionally wetting the bed. The bathroom was considered her bedroom. She was not given any bedding because they didn't want her to wet it. Wetting the bed at 11 years old can be a symptom of regression, which severe abuse can cause. One witness and temporary resident of the backyard told police he overheard Cynthia screaming at Ame in her shower stall bedroom while she beat the little girl for wetting herself. Other witnesses spoke of seeing Samantha shove Ame into the footlocker, after which John would kick the box, pick it up, and flip it over with Ame inside. Another temporary resident told investigators that about 6 months prior to Ame's death, he had heard screaming from inside the footlocker while Cynthia sat on top of it, playing on her laptop. As I mentioned, the family reportedly lived in several places over the course of Ame's nearly 11 years. At one point, they lived in Ogden, Utah, where Ame was permitted to attend school. According to Phoenix police, they were given access to Utah court records documenting alleged child abuse. Arizona court records show that in Utah, Ame was listed as an abused, neglected child. Those records include 3 instances where the family was investigated, including allegations of lice, a belt used for discipline, and a bump on Ame's head. Ame's second-grade teacher, Jolene Boydston, told a reporter that Ame's family members told her they didn't really think Ame belonged to them. Jolene described Ame as a bright and inquisitive child who craved the attention of adults and constantly came to school dirty, sometimes with head lice. Once, Ame came to school with cat urine soaking her shoes, and the school counselor helped her clean up and provided her with clean shoes. The school counselor, Jody Hansen, said the school had contacted the local Division of Child and Family Services, or DCFS, several times in regard to Amy and the other children in the home. Jody said it was clear that Amy was the scapegoat of the family. Jolene said she was aware that DCFS worked with the family and tried to help them clean up the home and learn parenting skills, but none of the children were removed. As is too common in child abuse cases, as soon as the school got in touch with DCFS, Cynthia withdrew Amy from school. Arizona CPS had no prior contact with the family or with Amy herself, which is likely because the children were supposedly homeschooled, meaning Amy had no contact with mandatory reporters. There was some evidence that at least some type of schooling was going on in the home. The garage seemed to be used as a classroom, in which folders were found for each of the children. In Amy's folder, investigators found many pages of sentences Amy was apparently forced to write repeatedly as punishment. The sentences included, "I will answer when talked to," "I will not steal food from the little ones," and "I will learn to clean my room." John Allen's parents lived in Ogden, Utah, where John was raised. After their son and his wife were arrested, John's mother, Mary Jo Allen, released a statement expressing the family's shock and horror that their son could live in and contribute to the deplorable environment in the Deal family's Phoenix home. She said they never saw any evidence of abuse while John lived with the Deals in Ogden, but that since the move to Phoenix, John became increasingly isolated from his parents. They encouraged their son to cooperate with the police and thanked everyone who prayed for their family. A reporter spoke with John's father, Michael Allen. Michael described John as a good son. John worked at the Standard Examiner's press room, where he was known as Little Bud, and he wanted to work with computers someday. He married Samantha, who lived across the street, in 2009. Michael said John seemed to be doing great until he called his parents from jail. Michael told a reporter that his son was very repentant and that Amy's death was an accident. He and Samantha had meant to let Amy out of the box, but they fell asleep. Kenneth Greast, a Pennsylvania man who had dated Amy's mother, Shirley, came forward shortly after Amy's death, telling reporters he believed he was Amy's real father. He had a relationship with Shirley, he said, while she was separated from David Deal and lived in the same apartment complex as Kenneth. Even though David's name was on Amy's birth certificate, Kenneth said he tried to raise the little girl as his own daughter while he and Shirley lived together for 3.5 years. Kenneth reminisced about Amy, remembering that she loved to sing so much that they bought her a karaoke machine. Over the years, he said, he tried to track Amy down, but because the Deal family constantly relocated, it was nearly impossible. As far as why Amy was singled out for abuse, Kenneth also believed it was because the Deals did not believe she was related to them. On February 22, 2012, another member of the Deal-Stoltzman family was arrested as well. 24-year-old Amanda Joanne Mandy Stoltzman, Cynthia's daughter and Samantha's sister, was arrested in Glendale, Arizona, after others gave statements about witnessing Amanda abusing Amy. Amanda did not live in the Phoenix home with the family. She was charged in Texas for incidents that took place while she lived with the family in Midland. The reports alleged that Amanda watched while family members choked Amy and that she herself hit Amy, kept her chained up outside overnight wearing a dog collar, and kept her in a dog crate. It was also alleged that Amanda scrubbed Amy's face with a wire brush as punishment for lying, kicked the little girl in the face, and forced her to drink extremely spicy hot sauce. Amanda initially denied the allegations, but police said she later admitted to them, as well as much more. Amanda reportedly told police that she witnessed her mother, Cynthia, throw Amy into the swimming pool, where Amy's arms flailed while her head was underwater. Amy was said to be petrified of water. When Amy came up for air, she was crying, coughing, and choking. Amanda also admitted to forcing Amy to crush aluminum cans with her bare feet, sleep in a pan made for a shower floor, and eat food that had been doused in brutally spicy hot sauce. She told of not allowing Amy to go to school or play with other children and forcing her to stay home when the rest of the family went somewhere. Amanda said she began keeping Amy in the dog crate as early as 2005. While Amanda admitted to almost everything, she denied using the wire brush on Amy's face and kicking her young cousin in the face. Amanda was initially arrested on 3 counts of felony child abuse. Amy's father, 52-year-old David Martin Deal, was arrested on July 6, 2012 on suspicion of dangerous crimes against children, 4 counts of child abuse, and 3 counts of kidnapping. Detectives alleged that witnesses told them David was the first to use confinement as a punishment for Ame, using a dog kennel. David was also accused of throwing the footlocker with Ame inside into the backyard pool because she kept crying and yelling that she couldn't breathe. As you'll recall, the only holes that admitted air into the box were about the size of a pencil tip and located under the handles. David denied abusing Ame, but he did describe his daughter to detectives as a Pillsbury Doughboy-looking thing and said that she had mental problems that frustrated the family. I don't know if it's true that Ame did have any mental, behavioral, or learning challenges. The day after David's arrest, because of errors on the statement prepared by the Phoenix Police Department, it was ruled that there was no probable cause to hold him. He was rearrested on July 9, 2012, after County Attorney Bill Montgomery presented his case to a grand jury and a warrant was issued for 1 felony count of child abuse. At the time of David's second arrest, Phoenix police found $20 worth of marijuana in his back pocket, so he was charged with 1 count each of possession of marijuana and drug paraphernalia. There was a U-Haul truck in front of the residence when police arrived to arrest him, leading officials to believe that David was preparing to flee. He was held on a $250,000 cash-only bond. In April of 2013, all charges against Ame's cousin, Ame Deal, were dropped at the request of prosecutors. Maricopa County Attorney's Office spokesman Jerry Cobb refused to elaborate on the reasons for the decision, only telling reporters that there wasn't enough evidence to proceed despite the probable cause affidavit saying Ame Deal had admitted to much of the alleged abuse. Cynthia Stoltzman, Ame's aunt and legal guardian, faced 2 counts of child abuse, 1 count of attempted child abuse, and 2 additional abuse charges. She was accused of throwing Ame into the cold, murky backyard swimming pool several months before her death, forcing Ame's head underwater, and sitting on the footlocker while Ame was confined inside as a supposed punishment for stealing food. In April of 2013, Cynthia took a plea deal, pleading guilty to 2 counts of child abuse and 1 count of attempted child abuse. Cynthia's mother, Ame's grandmother, Judith Deal, faced 2 counts of attempted child abuse and up to 30 years in prison. She wasn't charged in Ame's death, but she was accused of hitting her granddaughter with a paddle, putting hot sauce into her mouth, and forcing her into the footlocker as discipline. Judith also took a plea deal, pleading guilty to attempted child abuse. Ame's father, David Deal, pleaded guilty on April 24, 2013, to attempted child abuse and marijuana possession. David was sentenced to 14 years in prison. David Deal, AZDOC inmate number 281582, is housed at Kingman Prison in Mojave County, Arizona. He is scheduled to be released on July 8, 2024. On September 13, 2013, Cynthia Stoltzman received a sentence of 24 years in prison. Judith Deal was sentenced to 10 years. They both received lifetime probation. Judith Deal, AZDOC inmate number 284286, was sent to Perryville Prison's San Carlos unit in Goodyear, Arizona. The Arizona Department of Corrections lists her as inactive and shows that her release date was February 23, 2020 due to absolute discharge, which means she was released to complete her sentence of probation. Judith is the only person convicted in Ame's death who has been released from prison thus far. Her daughter, Cynthia Stoltzman, AZDOC inmate number 284287, currently resides in Perryville Prison in Goodyear, Arizona, in its Santa Cruz unit. Cynthia's release date is set as July 3, 2036. Samantha Allen's trial began in May of 2017. When images of Ame's corpse were shown to jurors, some hung their heads, while others openly wept. Ame's skin and lips were discolored, and her hands had formed into claws. The bottoms of the little girl's feet were caked with dirt, her body was wet, and her hair was matted. Inside the box, there was just under an inch of brown liquid. Her knees were bruised and indented. Prosecutor Jeanette Gallagher produced first the actual box itself, wrapped in plastic to preserve the item as evidence. She also used a mannequin the same size as Ame to demonstrate how the little girl could not have fit comfortably inside the box. Testimony from retired Phoenix police detective Kenny Porter described Amy's condition from being folded and forced into the box overnight. He described red marks on her knees that indicated the box's lid had pressed against her skin for some time. Photos showed red marks, dirt, and debris on her neck and hemorrhaging under her eyelids, as well as the bruising and red indentations on her knees, indicating that the ribbing on the inside of the box's lid had pressed into her skin. Jurors heard audio of Samantha's initial police interview, in which she told police the box was Amy's most famous spot to hide in and that she often fell asleep inside. During that interview, Samantha told police her 3-year-old daughter discovered Amy's body in the box that morning and that the adults had not known Amy was in there. When Amy's older sister, who was 12 at the time of Amy's death, testified, she refuted the claims Samantha made in the video, telling jurors that despite her statement in 2011 to the contrary, the children had not played hide-and-seek the night of Amy's death. She said that she, her brother, and Amy were given popsicles for doing their chores, but she later saw the adults yelling at Amy for having her popsicle. She said that her sister was made to stand against the wall with her head back and her hands in the air, demonstrating the position for the jurors. Then, she said, while the rest of the family ate dinner, Amy was forced into the back-bend position for hours, crying and saying she was in pain. That was the last time she saw Amy before the rest of the kids went to bed. At that time, the teenager said, her cousin Samantha and her husband John were in the living room, painting little cars they had built. The teenager, who was not named to protect her identity, also said she was lying to protect her family when she corroborated the hide-and-seek story after her sister's death. Samantha's defense attorney, John Curry, tried to dump 100% of the blame on John Allen, saying not only did Samantha not actively participate in Amy's murder, but she didn't even know what was happening. Nonetheless, on June 26, 2017, Samantha was found guilty of first-degree murder. 9 days later, the jury determined that Samantha was eligible for the death sentence, which meant her actions were especially cruel and heinous. Prosecutor Gallagher said the physical and mental anguish Amy suffered inside the box would qualify as an aggravating circumstance. During Samantha's sentencing hearing in August, defense attorney Curry blamed the woman's behavior on her mother, Cynthia Stoltzman, and the environment in which Samantha had been raised. He said her world was dominated by her family and that she had no wider frame of reference, suggesting that because Samantha hardly knew anyone outside her family, she did not know that locking Amy in the box was wrong. Psychiatrists for the defense found Samantha suffered from depression, attention deficit disorder, exposure to parental child neglect, and impairments in brain and moral development, leaving her with below-average intelligence. Mr. Curry explained to the jury that Cynthia, who set the tone and culture of the house, was Samantha's moral compass, and that his client had told police that her driving moral belief was honor thy mother and father. He told the jury that Samantha had lost 2 husbands over her insistence on moving in with her family. He said that this sense of family loyalty was what caused Amy's death. Samantha's first husband, Joe Evans, testified that he met Samantha and Cynthia in 2006 when they came through a McDonald's drive-thru in Utah where he was working. He began dating Samantha shortly thereafter and witnessed the family's living conditions firsthand. Joe testified,
"It was feces on the walls, cockroaches, drawing on the walls, food on the floor."
Joe described a crowded home filled with several adults and multiple children, some of whom had lice. He and Samantha would sometimes babysit the children, including Amy.
Who was the best behaved out of those 3 children?
Amy.
Describe Amy for us.
She was moderately quiet, but still, happy. She never really caused any problems or anything like that.
Joe and Samantha were married in April of 2007 after dating for a period of months. He testified that they endured a miscarriage, which he said deeply affected Samantha, and that their relationship ended not long after they were married due to Samantha's frustration that Joe did not want to move in with her family. Joe testified that while he was with the family, Samantha was nice to Amy and did not abuse her.
Were there ways in which this Deal Stoltzman family struck you as being like a cult?
Yes. If you didn't fit in with them, then you were just cast aside.
Cynthia also testified at her daughter's sentencing hearing, saying her parents, Judith and Arthur Deal, divorced when she was 12, and Judith remarried several times, not for love, but for financial support. The prosecutor questioned Cynthia.
Were you ever made aware that Samantha was using the box on Amy?
No.
If you had found out that Samantha was using the box on Amy, what would you have done?
Told him not to. I already had put the box out.
Describe Amy and how she was when she would come out of the box.
She was Amy. I don't know what to say. It didn't look to me like she was in any sort of distress other than she cried because she didn't want to be in it.
Mr. Curry tried to discredit Cynthia's earlier testimony, in which Cynthia stated that she never told Samantha it was acceptable to use confinement in the footlocker as discipline for Amy, and that only a few family members knew that it had been used that way. He showed clips of young family members telling Phoenix police about the abuse that Amy suffered in the months and years before her death. After watching the clip, Samantha, who had previously contended that only she, Cynthia, and David were responsible for disciplining Amy, admitted that all of the adults in the family were involved in the long-term abuse of her cousin. Prosecutor Gallagher read a one-paragraph impact statement from Amy's mother, Shirley Deal, written to a judge in 2013. It read, quote, "I just wanted everyone in Arizona to know how I feel about what happened to my daughter. Learning how she suffered in the box was devastating, and it's something that would never leave me. I struggle, sadness and depression because of Amy's murder. I am so depressed from the time I get up until I go to bed at night. I go to the doctor all the time. I wish she was here with me day and night. I've not forgiven you and never will. The only thing you deserve is where you are going when you leave this earth. The death penalty is too good and too easy for you. I want you to suffer till death, just like you did to my sweet little Amy. They need to put you all on dog chains and feed you dog feces, as you did to my baby." End quote. Ultimately, the jury determined that the horror of Amy's murder outweighed any possible mitigating factors, including Samantha's age, her dysfunctional childhood, and her lack of a prior criminal record. She was sentenced to death. Superior Court Judge Teresa Sanders sentenced Samantha to an additional 76 years because of the aggravating factors in the case, including the especially cruel nature of the crime, the age of the victim, the presence of an accomplice, her husband, and the fact that Samantha was in a position of trust to Amy. She was given credit for the over 2,000 days she had already spent in custody. When the verdict was read, Samantha dropped her head and cried on her attorney, Mr. Curry's, shoulder. After Samantha's sentencing, jurors said,
"A lot of it comes back to the lack of remorse."
I was waiting for something from her. That was her chance to plead for her life, and it just fell short.
We just felt that at some point she wasn't as a passive person as we thought.
I think the hardest thing for all of us was the victim and learning about what her life really entailed, the years of abuse that she suffered.
Samantha Allen, AZDOC inmate number 320757, is now listed as Samantha Uriarty. She resides in Perryville Prison in Goodyear, Arizona, where Cynthia is also housed. Samantha is one of the only 3 female death row inmates in Arizona, all of whom are housed in Perryville's Lumley unit. I'll pause here for another quick sponsor break. John Allen's trial began on October 30, 2017, for his charges, which included 3 counts of child abuse, 1 count of attempted child abuse, and 1 count of first-degree murder. In his opening arguments, prosecutor Jay Rademacher painted a chilling picture of the morning of Amy's death, describing the little girl police found, already dead, on her back on a towel in the living room. Her hands were raised to her shoulders, the fingers frozen into claws. Her ankles and fingernails were purple, her skin yellow, her lips blue and pulling away from her teeth. Her hair was matted and her clothing wet, which they soon realized was because she had been locked into that black box where they saw about an inch of liquid, the bodily fluids of the dying girl. Prosecutor Rademacher reminded the jury that all of this took place over a popsicle. In his opening argument, defense attorney Rob Reinhart said that John did not intentionally kill Amy, breaking down for the jury the reason why felony murder is not the same as premeditated murder. It is, instead, a death that happens in the course of another crime being committed. In this case, that crime was child abuse. These jurors were shown photos of the crime scene, consisting of multiple rooms, each more cluttered than the last, as well as the garage classroom and the tent village in the backyard. Again, Prosecutor Jeanette Gallagher produced the plastic footlocker in the courtroom, asking the jury to consider why John hid the padlock if he didn't know he had committed a crime, or why he had told his wife he was turning himself in if he didn't know a crime had been committed. While Detective Greg McKay was on the stand, jurors were shown his initial interview with the defendant, in which John eventually confessed to locking Amy in the box several times previously, as well as doing so at about 1 a.m. on the morning she died. When he saw her the next morning, John said in the interview, she was face up with her legs hanging out of the box. He told Detective McKay that day that he tried to perform CPR on Amy. During the same interview, John told the detective that Amy was more difficult than the other children, saying she had a tendency to lie, steal food, and fail to complete her chores. Her punishments, he told the detective, included making her do back bends, pouring hot sauce into her mouth, spanking her with the butt buster, and forcing her into the box in which she ultimately died. John told the detective that as Amy's legal guardian, Cynthia was also her main disciplinarian. Former Maricopa County Chief Medical Examiner Dr. Philip Keene explained the ruling of suffocation as Amy's cause of death and demonstrated stuffing a cloth doll the same size as Amy into an exact replica of the footlocker. He gave clinical testimony about how Amy would have struggled to breathe, finally becoming unconscious and ultimately dying inside the box. In their closing statement, prosecutors reminded the jury that John had such little regard for Amy's life that he and Samantha went to sleep while Amy was trapped in that tiny box, suffocating to death in her own bodily fluids. During the defense's closing arguments, Mr. Reinhart said that John accepted responsibility for his actions. He argued that John, who, he reminded jurors, was the father of 4 young children himself, did not intend for Amy to die, saying the other adults in the home had created the abusive culture in the family and were simply manipulating John into participating. He asked the jury to consider if John might only be guilty of negligence or recklessness, which would not be enough to warrant a murder conviction. The jurors in John's trial deliberated for less than a day before coming to the unanimous verdict, guilty on all counts. John's sentencing hearing took place 2 weeks later, on December 7, 2017. At the hearing, John broke down, sobbing, as he told Judge Aaron O'Brien Otis,
"I want to say that I'm sorry. What happened was an accident."
John continued, calling himself an idiot and a jerk, apologizing to Amy, her family, and his own family, and saying he shamed all of them. The judge said,
"In my entire career, I think I have not seen too many cases that I can say have been worse than this one. This was one of the most unnecessary deaths of a child I've ever seen."
With that, John Michael Allen, age 29, was sentenced to death by lethal injection, plus at least 36 years in prison for child abuse and conspiracy to commit child abuse. When the sentence was announced, John initially did not react, staring at his hands. He could not get up from the defense table afterward, holding his head in his hands and weeping for at least 5 minutes after the judge left the bench. Outside the courtroom, John's sister spoke with reporters, saying,
"Just for my brother to be in this situation, it saddens my heart. It breaks my heart that he didn't say anything when he could have. But he made a mistake, and now he's going to pay for it with his life."
John Allen, AZDOC inmate number 323167, is serving his sentence in Amen Prison in Florence, Arizona. Death Row is located on Amen's Browning unit, but curiously, John is housed in Amen's Rinning unit. John and Samantha Allen are the first married couple ever to be sentenced to death in Arizona. It remains to be seen if they will ever actually be put to death. The last execution in the state took place in July of 2014. The appeals process in a death penalty case can take 20 years or longer after an inmate is sentenced. In 2020, the Arizona Supreme Court ruled on an appeal alleging jurors in John Allen's trial handed down a sentence that was too harsh. The justices dismissed that idea, saying capital punishment was warranted because Amy's death was especially cruel. They did expunge 3 of John's child abuse convictions after determining the trial court applied the sentencing enhancements improperly. The court vacated John's sentences on intentional child abuse, conspiracy to commit child abuse, and reckless child abuse, but his death sentence was upheld. The 3 child abuse charges were remanded back to the trial court for resentencing at a future date. Samantha is currently awaiting a ruling on her current appeal, which is due on October 2, 2023. Her last appeal ended in 2022 when her convictions and death sentence were affirmed, but her sentence for child abuse was remanded back to the trial court for resentencing. Amy's death caused enough public outrage to call attention to Arizona's flawed child welfare system, which led to a massive overhaul of that system and the creation of several new laws. Soon after Amy's case, Prosecutor Montgomery advocated for Detective Greg McKay, who was appointed as director of the agency now known as DCS in February of 2015. During a press conference in December of 2017, Montgomery said he gathered a very small degree of consolation that Amy's death was not in vain because it served as a catalyst for change. He said that under McKay's leadership, DCS had done a 180-degree turnaround, making changes that included more transparency and the ability to more quickly provide information about child deaths and near fatalities, which was impossible in 2011 when Amy died. McKay also spoke, saying he vowed not to let children die in vain. In his new position, McKay had the ability to affect thousands of children's lives in a positive way. He went over some of the improvements the agency had made, including lowering caseloads from upwards of 150 per staff member to around 12 or 15, a backlog of formerly around 16,000 cases being reduced to around 280, and drastically lowering foster care numbers. Both men stressed that more work needed to be done, including involving the public to a greater degree when it came to reporting suspected neglect and abuse, not to mention parents providing better parenting. Greg McKay stepped down as DCS director in July of 2019 to become the Chief Operating Officer of Child Help USA, a nonprofit agency helping victims of child abuse nationwide. Even though Amy may not have experienced love during the last several years of her life, she is cherished and adored now, both by those who knew her and by those of us who never met her but refused to let her memory die. Jolene Boydston, Amy's second-grade teacher, told a reporter she didn't want Amy to be remembered as an abused girl who died in a box, but as a beautiful human being. Family members on Facebook have mentioned that Amy had a contagious giggle and that her favorite snack was corn curls. A former neighbor in Utah talked about how Amy was a sweetheart who liked singing and playing in the sprinkler. She said her family still set off fireworks on July 24th, Amy's birthday, in her honor. Ross Lunsford, former principal at James Madison Elementary in Ogden, Utah, recalled Amy always had a smile on her face and that she was the kid in school that every teacher wanted to take home. He fondly remembered how Amy would attach herself to his leg and refuse to let go as he walked down the hallway. That's it for this episode. Thank you for having me, and if you feel so inclined, please check out my podcast, Suffer the Little Children, on your favorite podcast platform, on YouTube, and at sufferthelittlechildrenpod.com. I've been your guest host, Laine, and it's been my honor to tell you Amy's story. Thanks for listening, and stay safe, New Mexico.